What if I told you that a woman, seemingly living the perfect suburban life, claimed she was being stalked, assaulted, and threatened by her husband's ex-girlfriend? The messages she received were terrifying, full of detailed threats and personal information no stranger could possibly know. There were disturbing emails, explicit warnings, and even evidence of a violent home invasion. The police took the case seriously. The woman appeared genuinely frightened, and her injuries looked real. But as the investigation progressed, what began as a straightforward case of harassment turned into one of the most bizarre and twisted crime stories in recent years. Angela Diaz had just married Ian Diaz, a U.S. Marshal, and the couple was settling into their new home in Anaheim, California. On the surface, everything seemed perfect. Angela was charming, articulate, and seemed deeply in love with her new husband. But shortly after their wedding, she began receiving anonymous threats. Emails started flooding her inbox, vile, disturbing messages filled with insults and menacing predictions. The tone was personal, emotional, and almost obsessive. Angela quickly pointed the finger at one person, Ian's ex-girlfriend, Michelle Hadley. Angela told police that Michelle couldn't accept the end of her relationship with Ian. She claimed Michelle was furious about the engagement and had launched a campaign to terrorize her into leaving him. She said Michelle was stalking her, sending threats, and even using Craigslist to lure strangers to their home. According to Angela, some of the ads were for violent encounters, dangerous setups that could have ended in tragedy. Police found messages that seemed to confirm Angela's claims, including one where a stranger showed up at their house expecting a sexual encounter arranged through a Craigslist ad. Things escalated dramatically when Angela said she was physically attacked in her garage. She said she was grabbed, tied up, and sexually assaulted by a man she believed had been sent by Michelle. Photos of her injuries circulated among investigators and were later leaked to the media. Angela seemed visibly traumatized and distraught. Her statements were emotional and vivid, and she described every detail of the alleged assault with disturbing clarity. The case now had everything: a jealous ex, threats, online exploitation, and an actual physical attack. For investigators, it looked like Michelle Hadley had gone too far. Michelle was quickly arrested and charged with multiple felonies, including stalking, criminal threats, and attempted rape. Her bail was set at an astronomical $1 million. She sat in jail for 88 days while the media tore her apart. Headlines labeled her a stalker, a predator, and even a sexual deviant. Her career came to a halt. Her friends and colleagues distanced themselves, and her family was plunged into emotional and financial ruin. Michelle maintained her innocence, but the evidence seemed stacked against her. Emails had been traced back to her Gmail account, and Angela had all the signs of a traumatized victim. But beneath the surface, cracks began to show. Investigators started to notice odd inconsistencies in Angela's timeline. Some emails supposedly sent by Michelle were traced to IP addresses that didn't match her known locations. Others were created with suspiciously similar writing patterns, down to the punctuation and phrasing. A few were even sent at times when Michelle was verifiably somewhere else, including when she was at work or at meetings documented by her employer. Something wasn't adding up, and detectives began to suspect that the story wasn't as clear-cut as they first believed. The turning point came when cybercrime experts were brought in to examine the email metadata and routing information. What they found was shocking. Many of the threatening emails had been sent from Angela's own devices. IP logs showed they originated inside the Diaz home, often from the very Wi-Fi network Angela used daily. Even more damning, some of the Craigslist ads that had supposedly endangered her life were created using her smartphone. Slowly, the image of the terrified wife began to crumble, and the horrifying possibility emerged that Angela had staged the entire thing. Investigators confronted Angela with the digital evidence, and her story began to unravel. She failed to provide clear explanations for key inconsistencies, and when pressed, contradicted earlier statements she had made. Her injuries, once thought to be proof of assault, were now under scrutiny. Medical experts questioned whether the wounds were self-inflicted. The entire case shifted focus from Michelle the villain to Angela the manipulator. As detectives dug deeper, they began to uncover what looked like an elaborate attempt to frame an innocent woman for crimes she did not commit. Eventually, the charges against Michelle were dropped. She was released from jail and cleared of all accusations, but the damage had already been done. Her reputation was shattered, and her mental health deeply impacted. In the meantime, Angela Diaz was arrested and charged with multiple counts of perjury, false imprisonment, and filing false police reports. She had manipulated law enforcement, faked attacks, and manufactured evidence, all to ruin Michelle Hadley. Her motive, some believed it was jealousy, while others suggested it was a desperate bid for control over Ian and his past relationships. Angela eventually pled guilty and was sentenced to several years in prison. The story captivated the country, not just because of the shocking false accusations, but because of how easily one person was able to deceive the justice system using technology, lies, and emotional manipulation. It raised serious questions about how victims are believed, how evidence is handled, and how far someone might go to destroy another person's life. What started as a case of stalking ended up being one of the most bizarre and unsettling modern crimes involving digital deception and psychological warfare. What's truly disturbing about this case is not just what Angela did, but how convincing she was while doing it. Her tears seemed genuine, her fear looked real, and she used all of it to manipulate the people around her. Police officers, doctors, even her husband. This wasn't someone making a small lie to avoid consequences. This was someone who meticulously constructed an entire alternate reality, step by step, email by email, injury by injury. The depth of her deception revealed a psychological profile far more complex than anyone had imagined at first glance. Experts later suggested Angela exhibited traits consistent with factitious disorder, formerly known as Munchausen's syndrome, where a person fabricates illness or trauma to gain attention or sympathy. But Angela's actions also hinted at traits of narcissistic and borderline personality disorders, conditions marked by intense fear of abandonment, emotional instability, and manipulative behavior. She seemed to crave not just attention, but control over her husband, over her narrative, and over anyone she perceived as a threat to her image or relationship. Michelle Hadley became the perfect scapegoat. Ian Diaz, Angela's husband at the time, was also left reeling. He had been a federal agent trained to detect deception, and yet even he was fooled. The emotional whiplash from seeing his wife go from victim to villain left him publicly humiliated and personally devastated. Later, in civil litigation, questions arose about his own conduct and what he may have known. But legally, all focus shifted to Angela. She had used Ian's status as a U.S. Marshal to bolster her credibility, trusting that no one would question the story of a federal officer's new wife being harassed by a jealous ex. Michelle Hadley, for her part, endured unimaginable trauma. She lost her job, her freedom, her sense of safety. She spoke publicly after her release, describing the helplessness of being accused of something so vile while having no way to prove her innocence. She called her time in jail a psychological nightmare, isolated, ridiculed, and forced to live with the belief that the justice system had already made up its mind. Even after being exonerated, she continues to battle the lasting scars of a story that should never have happened in the first place. Angela Diaz's calculated deception highlights something chilling about our digital age, how easy it can be to forge evidence, plant doubt, and hijack someone's identity. Her use of email spoofing, VPNs, and online marketplaces to stage an entire criminal narrative shows just how fragile our trust in digital footprints can be. It also underlines how biases, especially those based on emotional cues like tears or fear, can cloud even a seasoned investigator's judgment. The system, in this case, worked backward. It believed the emotion first and questioned the facts only after it was almost too late. What makes this case even more unsettling is how close it came to succeeding. If Angela had stopped after a few emails, if she hadn't pushed for physical evidence and continued to escalate, Michelle might still be branded a criminal. The deeper Angela went, the more her own lies unraveled. But that unraveling came only after Michelle's life had already been dismantled. In many ways, it's a story of timing. Had one detective not paused to question a detail in an IP log, this might have ended with a long prison sentence for someone completely innocent. Angela's story reminds us that not all victims are truthful, and not all aggressors leave visible bruises. She weaponized the trust society often extends to women who say they've been attacked, and in doing so, she harmed real victims everywhere. When people like Angela lie, they don't just hurt the person they target, they damage the credibility of every future victim who comes forward. That's why this case has become a landmark cautionary tale in both law enforcement training and public awareness campaigns about false accusations. In the courtroom, Angela appeared a shadow of the confident woman who once pleaded for help. She was no longer the victim in need of protection. She was the architect of her own downfall. And yet, even at sentencing, she refused to fully accept responsibility, blaming mental health struggles and external pressures. The court wasn't moved. She received a 5-year sentence, though many believed it should have been longer. Meanwhile, Michelle Hadley walked out of jail free, but forever changed. The cost of her freedom had been trust, reputation, and peace of mind. The bizarre saga of Angela Diaz and Michelle Hadley is now used in criminal justice programs as a case study in digital manipulation, false testimony, and psychological profiling. It's a story that forces us to question how much we rely on digital evidence, how quickly we judge based on emotion, and how fragile reputations can be in the age of viral crime stories. And more importantly, it shows just how dangerous one person's lies can become when wrapped in the cloak of victimhood and amplified by our legal and social systems. This wasn't just a story about false accusations. It was a calculated, strategic assault on truth, and it almost worked. Angela Diaz turned herself into a victim to destroy someone else's life, and she nearly got away with it. But in the end, the facts caught up with her, and Michelle Hadley, after nearly losing everything, emerged as a haunting example of how easily any of us could be accused, silenced, and erased if the wrong person decides they have something to gain from our destruction.